So our orientation was in a large uh, auditorium.
And so I walked up to the first two people I met at orientation, who were two women who were talking to each other, and introduced myself.
When the lights went out, we were thrust into silence, and all of a sudden the air conditioning, you could feel the room starting to get hotter by the minute.
So I definitely felt like I was out of my element and I didn't know what I was doing.
Hello, and welcome, fellow Huskies.
Welcome to UW Law. We're so excited to have you.
I'm so happy to see all of you today, even though it's not in person.
Welcome, 1Ls. We are so excited to have you here, and not just because we haven't seen any humans in months.
And I am a Husky. I was where you are now 20 years ago when I began my law school career.
Students, I know because of our current circumstance, it seems like it'll be a little more difficult to create that community, but we're going to work to create opportunities.
But law school is hard, and so you're going to need people to support you.
The whole law school experience is really about finding the people that are going to be important for you in your legal career.
So my advice to you is to seek out the resources and the mentors that are going to help you through law school, because you can do it.
So welcome to the law school, and please hit the ground running.
Your first day of law school is definitely going to be better than my first day of law school because, a few things happened on my first day of law school. First, we, it turns out, had a mandatory seating chart that everybody had to sign up on, but I, for whatever reason, missed that and didn't. And so the only seat left was the very back seat in the very middle. And in a very gendered way, there were no women sitting any of the three back rows, which was maybe fine, and you wouldn't have noticed me, except that the night before my first class at law school, one of my brothers came to visit me, and he decided on a lark that we should dye the hair of one of us. And his theory was like, well, let's do yours, Liz, because your hair is shorter than mine, which at the time was true. And so we went to the drugstore, and he dyed my hair this like dark purple aubergine color, which did not look good on me or at all, and was very, very visible. So I started my very first day of law school sort of in the very middle of the very back row of around 120 people, looking kind of edgy, but not in a good way. And then a few weeks later, I went to the hair salon and I was like, could you just get rid of this dark purple? And they removed all the pigment from my hair. And then I had like utterly platinum hair for the next 6 weeks. So I guess my basic advice to you is that make no major changes the night before you start law school.
So I do have a funny story about day one of law school. So when I was a law student, the law school was in the other building, the kind of concrete bunker building called Condon Hall. And although we did have listservs 20 years ago, they used a printed newsletter called the Condon Crier, and they would hang it on these bulletin boards. And they hung the day one reading assignments on the bulletin boards instead of sending them out. And I was so nervous that instead of writing down the assignment for Civil Procedure 1, I wrote down the assignment for Civil Procedure 2, and instead of reading about personal jurisdiction, which is the power of the courts to have authority over people, kind of a fundamental issue, I read about class action lawsuits, which I still remember to this day, and then sat in Civ Pro 1 for 90 minutes praying that I wouldn't be called on. And I wasn't, thank goodness. So that's the story that sticks with me about day one of law school. The other thing that I did want to say, though, about day one and also the days of orientation leading up to the first day of school is there were a number of different presentations, but for me, I was mostly focused on finding my people. I was older, I was queer, I was concerned that would I find a place in this law school to find my people? And I'm here to tell you I did. So not only is the first couple of days of law school about learning the material, but the whole law school experience is really about finding the people that are going to be important for you in your legal career?
I remember my first day of law school because I was absolutely terrified. I didn't know any lawyers before I came to law school. I had never even spoken to a lawyer. I was the first person in my family to go to college and law school. So I definitely felt like I was out of my element and I didn't know what I was doing. But lucky for me, that first day was my first torts class. I was in a small section, and in that class, my professor shared with us that she was also a first generation student from Arkansas, also from a small town. And I knew in that moment that I had met someone who knew what it was like to be me, who knew what it was like to show up and feel like you're playing a game that somebody forgot to tell you the rules for. So I developed a really close relationship with her. I became a tutor for torts when I was at 2L. I was a research assistant for her, and I'm still in touch with her 18 years later. And she has been a wonderful mentor over the years. So my advice to you is to seek out the resources and the mentors that are going to help you through law school, because you can do it. But law school is hard. And so you're going to need people to support you. And if you ever need a cheerleader for you, if you're a first generation student or otherwise, you can always reach out to me for support.
So our orientation was in a large auditorium. I went to Columbia Law School, and it was a hot, sticky summer day. And around 4 o'clock, as our final panel of the day was starting, we were just at that point where the admissions officer tells you about all the amazing people in your class when the lights went out. We were thrust into silence, and all of a sudden the air conditioning, you could feel the room starting to get hotter by the minute. And it turned out that the entire city had undergone a blackout. There was no subway running all the way from New York to Ohio. Everything was, all the power was entirely out. So this was a pretty interesting experience, getting to know people as we were shuffling out of the building in semi-panic and still not knowing what was happening. Nobody had cell phones, so we hadn't figured out what was going on. Our deans just tried to kind of keep us calm. We all filtered out into the main building and beyond. Because the subway wasn't working, we had to walk home, kind of figure out our way in a pre-Google Maps era. And it was my first experience of a city and a community really rallying around each other to try to figure out what our neighbors needed and how we could help each other. And the school was so organized that by the time our next session happened, I think that was a Monday, they had already gotten little Columbia Law School flashlights for us to commemorate that we were going to be lighting the way together and kind of shining light into the future. But I thought of it recently as we all head into something uncertain and in the midst of an emergency that we're containing, but we're still riding through. And I have to say that I think our entire class bonded because of the strangeness of this circumstance. Now, that was only a few days of strange power outage, but it was a pretty memorable and unusual start to law school.
So my first day of law school was unusual in that, so at the time I entered law school, I was a lieutenant in the United States Navy, and I was coming to law school from a ship that had been on deployment. And so I flew right in to California from my ship with little opportunity to prepare myself for law school or to even get any kind of grounding about what I was doing. And so I walked up to the first two people I met at orientation, who were two women who were talking to each other, and introduced myself and struck up a conversation, which I thought was casual, which I thought, would be my first of many conversations with two people who I would probably know at least a little bit in law school. And as it turned out, I started conversations with two people who would become two of my best friends in law school and in life. And let me tell you, that turned out to be a really interesting relationship once I learned more about them, because the reason they were talking to each other is that they had known each other as undergraduates at Stanford University. I myself was a proud graduate of the University of California at Berkeley, where we three together were going to law school. And as you know, our dreaded rival at the University of California at Berkeley is Stanford. And so I had to completely reorient myself after I realized the two cool, amazing classmates I had just met were people I wasn't supposed to like at all. And I think there's a real great lesson in that, which is one, we all come from different backgrounds, and there are some differences that are meaningful and others like alma maters, which are at least entertaining. And that in the very first few minutes of law school, we were able to learn about each other, to share some things, to put aside some faux differences. And that, importantly, two people I met on the first day of law school are still incredibly important in my lives. I've been, to their weddings, and there's, children who are godchildren now. And so the thing I want to say to you is really do take the opportunity to meet your colleagues, to learn about them, and to share yourself with them. Because the truth is, the people you're meeting now are likely to be in your lives for a very, very long time. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, a great thing.